Welcome to the Sloan channel, where stories don't just entertain, they haunt. What you're about to hear is a tale of survival, betrayal, and buried secrets. Written by author Sloan. The Survivor. Narrated by Judith. 20 years ago, Abbey Jonas survived the unthinkable. Her entire family, slaughtered in a brutal massacre. She was just 7, and believed to be the only one who made it out alive. But what if that was a lie? What if someone else survived? Someone no one suspected. Someone hiding behind a mask of innocence, the real killer, lurking in the shadows all these years. Abbey was blamed. Wrongly accused. And now, as the bodies start piling up again, she begins to wonder. Can she escape the past a second time? Or will the real killer find her first? So grab your headphones and brace yourself, because the truth will twist deeper than you expect. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment if you're hooked, and share this with someone who loves true suspense. Tell me in the comments, should I upload the next episode? Let's begin.
Kriak! It was a guy's voice. Abbey opened her eyes wide. Her eyes narrowed as the light faded. Speak nothing at all. She let out a scream. However, a hand covered her mouth. Hard. Don't tell. Isabella? Was her sister squeezing her head back into the cushions and keeping her down? She was having a problem. Cease. Don't say anything, just listen. A whisper of caution was placed in her ear. Warm breath hugging her skin. She urged, "Listen to me," in an enthusiastic tone. This was no joke, not the kind of practical joke Abbey had grown up with, because of her 3 brothers' pranks. Her mother nicknamed them Oracle Journalists, her dad had said. But now it was only Isabella, and she felt terrified. "Do what I say," Isabella cautioned. "No inquiries, no disputes. Don't cry out, Abbey, this is serious." "Why?" Isabella spoke as if she could read Abbey's thoughts, saying, "Just believe me, I can't explain now. You're a female genius. Isn't that what all the educators say? That children your age are far behind you? So please, follow my instructions. Come on now." With her hair rustling across her pillow and her eyes accustomed to the dim light, Abbey shook her head. Isabella could handle whatever it was that had worried her so greatly. Mom would be aware of what to do. Please, don't make any noise. You got that? Abbey couldn't help but help herself when Isabella raised her hand. "How come?" she began to murmur, and Isabella's hand came back. More robust. Abbey was pressed back into the blankets. "Please pay attention to me." Isabella gritted her teeth and persisted. Abbey was instantly halted by her piercing, fervent cry. Even though Mama had sometimes called the elder daughter a drama queen, this instance was distinct. Isabella wasn't like the others. Terrified beyond belief. Abbey felt it. She remained still. "You must conceal yourself, right now." "Hideaway? At this moment, do you get it?" Claire nodded, her eyes wide. Isabella began to remove her hand from Abbey's face and said, "And it can't be here." "Why?" "Mama, where are you?" Abbey hurriedly murmured. She was unable to resist. "Give up! Abbey, please!" Once again, Isabella covered her younger sister's lips with her hand. More difficult. Abbey's head was forced back into the pillow. "No inquiries! You'll be heard by them!" Whom? Who could hear her? Abbey had an insane heartbeat. Her blood tingled with fear. "Come along with me and keep quiet." "Abbey, I do mean it. This place is full of nasty individuals. They are unable to locate you. Do you realize that they will harm you if they do?" Isabella's face drew nearer, and even in their dimly lit bedroom, Abbey could see the anxiety in Isabella's wide blue eyes. Her blonde hair was arranged in a single braid, and she was wearing jeans and a hoodie. Abbey gave a sharp shake of her head. "All right. This is the last time," Isabella cautioned. "Are you done?" Slowly, Abbey nodded. She was insanely terrified. Assure me you'll keep quiet." Despite the swelling knot in her throat, Abby swallowed and nodded once more. "Abby Bear, I adore you. I'll come pick you up. I swear." Isabella paused for a brief moment before pulling away her hand. Abby remained silent. "All right," Isabella said, glancing out the window to see the moonlight dancing on the deep layer of snow before grabbing Abby's hand. "Go ahead." She pulled, but Abby didn't need further prodding. She struggled to free herself from the heap of pajamas. They slipped past Isabella's bed, where Abby could see many orderly stacks of clothing arranged above the crumpled coverlet, even in the dark. Isabella's boots were also lying on the bed. However, similar to Abby, she was now barefoot, so that no one would hear her footsteps. Abby felt her blood freeze. This was incorrect. Very incorrect. She trod on a toy, likely a Barbie shoe, but remained silent as Isabella opened the hallway door. The faint sounds of a Christmas song rose from the floor below, along with the smell of the fading fire's wood smoke. Quiet night. Isabella looked deep into the shadows. Good Friday night. Isabella inhaled deeply before giving Abby a tight grip and said, "Let's go." At the far end of the hall, where the stairs curved down to the first floor and light curled eerily up from below, she drew her younger sister into the dim, narrow hallway. Past the closed doors of the boys' dormitories, the big doors to Mama and Daddy's bedroom were just beyond the railing. Everything is at ease. Abby's heart skipped a beat. She was being taken by Isabella to get Mama, but no. She came to a halt at the last door before the stairway that descended, the door that was never unlocked, the opening that led up to the attic, and the maze of unoccupied rooms above. How come? Not at all. Everything is brilliant. Abby objected. She refused to go up there. No, no, no. She opened her mouth to argue, but Isabella saw through her and sent her a steely stare. Bong! The sound made Abby jump, her heart pounding. All that could be heard above the music was the grandfather clock at the front entrance, which was counting down the hours. As she carefully climbed the few wooden stairs, Isabella muttered under her breath, "Jesus," and drew Abby up after her. Bong! With every stride, Abby felt the temperature decrease and muttered, "Isabella, no. There is nothing we can do." As they made their way to the third level, Isabella yelled, her voice still quiet. Instead of turning on a light, she took a little flashlight out of her pocket and turned it on, allowing its narrow beam to pass over draping chairs, boxes, abandoned lamps, piles of books, and open bags containing discarded clothing. Her mother said that the additional area had formerly been servants' quarters, but her family now used it for storage. Mama had lighted a cigarette and said, "I wish," alerting her patchwork family to the dangers of the location and forbidding them from entering. Never, ever go up there. If you do, you're inviting some major grounding. Can you hear me? Sincerely. Naturally, her threat had not materialized. Naturally, they had all crept up on us and had a look around. Even though this region was off-limits, Abby's brothers would often climb up there, and she had explored the maze-like network of interconnected chambers, enough to be familiar with it. But tonight, with the doors locked like sentinels down the tiny hallway, the cold apartments seemed terrible and ominous in the darkness. "Bong! Where is Mama now?" she asked once again, trying not to worry. Isabella shook her head, giving her a quick look. She put a finger to her lips to warn Abby that she must be silent, and then she dragged her tensely over the third story's bare floor. This was incorrect. Very incorrect. There was another stairway, considerably closer and smaller, at the far end of the hall. Stopped. It descended and came to rest in the kitchen. Abby momentarily believed they were heading back the way, which seemed foolish since they had just climbed. But Isabella had other ideas. She came to a halt at the little attic door that resembles a closet, just before they reached the stairs. Abby's uneasy sensation deepened. "What do you do with this?" After taking a key out of her trousers' front pocket, Isabella inserted it into the lock. The attic door creaked open a second later. "Get moving." Pulling back, Abbey shook her head. "I'd prefer not to. Isabella would never." Isabella hauled her into the narrow opening and jerked the door shut behind them, saying, "Don't care. How in the world is this? Avoid using profanity. However, observe, you are being saved by me, us." As she flicked the ancient switch, there was a loud click. Nothing took place. As they stood there in the dark, Isabella whispered, "Don't use profanity," Abbey shot back. "And protecting us from what?" "Don't tell. Calm. You want to remain ignorant. Indeed." "Indeed I do. Tell me." "Observe, this is dot in tricate comma." Isabella paused. "And frightful." She turned on her lights once more, so they could see the steps curving upward, saying, "Yes, and." The rickety old stairway that led to the garret beneath the eaves was steep and only big enough for the Abbey's feet. In the little room, it was pitch black and chilly. "I refuse to go up there." "You are, of course. Come on, please." This was not good. Abbey felt her skin crawl, but she refrained from arguing. Isabella's tone was so different from her own that it even subdued the usually disobedient Abbey as she was nudged up the stairs. Isabella had the little flashlight in her hand, and the route was lit by its meager beam. Isabella paused at the top of the stairs, under the sloping ceilings where Abbey was sure bats roosted, leaving Abbey standing on the attic floorboards, while she lingered one step below, putting them nose to nose and eye to eye. She directed the flashlight close to her face, causing it to distort her features in shadow, shadowing the little dimple on her chin and forming an unsettling mask reminiscent of their brother Joan's when he used a flashlight to create a macabre effect under his face when narrating ghost tales. Tonight, however, was distinct. It wasn't a game tonight. Abbey knew that much. "You must wait for me, so stay here." "No!" Only for a brief moment, Abbey shook her head. "Mama, please. I understand, but I have already assured you that won't occur." "Why?" A panic sprang inside her. "You won't abandon me here by myself. Only for a brief moment. No." "Abbey, I'm leaving this place." "How come you would even say that?" Abdia demand. "I just need to make sure it's secure, all right?" "That's not okay. No. I'll come fetch you then." "I swear." "Safe from what exactly?" Abbey sobbed, terrified. Her siblings were lying when they tacked on a "I promise" to everything they said. "You said that some individuals were terrible here. Whom?" "I'm not sure." "How do they do this?" "I am not." "No, I don't. I'm not certain. But I am certain that something exists. Something very horrible, Abbey." "What?" "What's not good?" "I'm not sure. And here it is." Indeed. Please follow my instructions." Abbey had a suspicion that her sister was lying. "Where are Daddy and Mama?" A rhythm. "Out. Liar." What made Isabella tell her a lie? "Abbey, what about Donner, Joan, and Sam?" Abbey inquired in a panic. Her other half-brothers, everybody had visited earlier. After supper, she spotted them. Joan, the recluse, had been in his room practicing his ninja moves, or whatever it was he always did, while Donner and Sam had been playing video games, listening to music, and maybe even drinking. He had been called Joan Jo Judo, HH tested Bella. Everyone's gone. Away? On Christmas Eve? It didn't seem right. Then what fear do you harbor? Isabella anxiously licked her lips. She spoke in the faintest of whispers. "There is someone here," I said. "Someone else. Someone evil." "Whom? How are you aware?" This was absurd. "But you just mentioned that everyone was out, so what?" "I'm afraid of you. Well done. Mama, please. She's not here, as I told you." Even though Isabella's voice was still barely audible, it had a hint of edge. Similarly, Mama Masni was irate, or annoyed with Abbey's brothers. "Just give me a chance to speak. You will remain here for a short while until it is safe to do so, after which I will return and—" "No!" Was Isabella planning to abandon her alone in the middle of the night? Isabella was trying to repeat, just for a while, but Abbey was wildly shaking her head. No, no, it is not possible. Please stay with me. Abbey yanked furiously at her sister. What was Isabella up to? Why? She was 7 years old and didn't know why she was being abandoned. By yourself. Here I was, in this dank, moldy, dust-covered attic that was probably home to wasps, spiders, rats, and every other icky thing in the world. I'm not staying up here by myself. Hush! Say nothing! Isabella's hands clenched around Abbey's wrists. Would you please? Pay attention! Isabella spoke in an acerbic tone, a whisper, akin to a snake's warning hiss. She shook hands with Abbey. She ran her fingers along Abbey's long-sleeved pajamas. Ah, say nothing at all, Abbey Bear. Remain silent. Do you hear me? I mean it. But you cannot abandon me here. Not in this chilly, drafty area beneath the peaked roof's eaves. I'm going to freeze. You are not going to. This was incorrect. Even though Abbey was only about 8 years old, she knew that this was incorrect. Mistaken for sure. You're telling lies. Isabella tightly clutched her forearm, causing Abbey to drop the flashlight, which then tumbled down the stairs. She cursed. Just follow instructions, Abbey, please, she said, before running down the stairs and almost tripping over the flashlight. Isabella arrived at the door ahead of Abbey, who followed a step behind, slipped through, and closed it. Press, I said, press. When Abbey tried to turn the doorknob, it remained in place. Secured? Is the door locked? Has Isabella shut me inside? She heard Isabella hurry off, and as she did, she was filled with rage and terror. No, 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 Isabella! She banged on the door and shook the doorknob, but decided against it as her fury subsided. This was no practical joke. There was a problem, very incorrect. Something nasty, that is. She forced herself to swallow her dread and wiped away the resentful tears that had welled up in her eyes. Where her sister's fingers had tightened, her arms hurt. She was desperate to get out of this cage with a sloping roof and breathe again. She wanted to shout, yell, and smash her fists against the door in hopes that someone would hear her. She didn't, however. Her mind was filled with Isabella's words, which echoed like the sound of death. It's frightening and extremely complex. She bit her lip, shivering, and fixed her gaze on the door, a black wall separating her from the outside world. She was unable to just wait there. What would happen if Isabella's suspected intruder came upstairs and discovered her? How could he harm Isabella? How about if? Abbey felt a pain in her heart. She yearned for her parents once again. They'd be aware of what to do. However, Isabella insisted they were gone, and she was not lying. Not about her, though. With her teeth chattering and her heart pounding wildly, Abbey reached for the flashlight and shivered, staring at the door while trying to hear something above her heart's erratic beating. Her flesh grew itchy. Seated on the bottom step, she flicked on and off the tiny flashlight, observing its yellowish beam briefly illuminating the rear of the door before she was once more engulfed in darkness. Proceed. Not on. Proceed. Click each time, repeatedly. With each turn of the flashlight, the light got dimmer. She was unable to wait around for the flashlight's batteries to run out. And what if Isabella never returned? Abbey wanted to scream and thrash at the door, to rattle the door handle frantically. She reached for the handle again, her fingers curling over the cold lever. But she stopped herself. It would do no good. And possibly draw unwelcome attention. No, she had to be clever. She had to find another means to escape. Determined, she ascended the rickety stairs again, to the attic, where a solitary round window rose far above, and the pale moonlight reflected the dimmest of light through the dusty, forgotten boxes stacked everywhere. The boxes and crates were marked with words written on them, some of which Abbey could read. Books, clothes, office, or denoted with names: Sam Jr., Joan, Donner, Isabella, her sister and brothers. No box for her, the youngest, the only child of both mother and father. Not yet. She heard the rustling of something living in the distant corner. Tiny claws on the wood floor, a squirrel or a mouse, or a rat. She was going through a box, shivering, when she heard a terrible, spine-tingling scream coming from a lower level. Ah! Abby gave a start. She almost passed out. The terrible cry reverberated throughout the house as she inhaled sharply. What did that consist of? Who was that? Isabella? Mom? Or another individual? The house trembled. Something massive had toppled. Abby blinked back tears as her mouth turned to dust. Was that a human body? Someone screamed in pain, then fell? Isabella? She sobbed and mouthed the word, Mama. Be not a baby. With her heart racing and her dread almost stopping her, she pushed herself to scan the boxes once again with the flashlight's narrow beam and saw the one labeled Office. The cardboard flaps were folded, leaving a gap when closed. She flashed the light inside and saw yellowed papers, an ancient stapler, envelopes, a tape dispenser, and a pair of dusty scissors. She picked up the scissors and a paperclip that held several papers together, then quietly made her way down the stairs to the entrance. As she'd seen Joan do at the closed bathroom door when she'd been spying on him, she took the paperclip, straightened it as best she could, and put it into the little hole under the lever. She'd tried it once previously in Junior and Donner's room, and it had worked, and now... She twisted the little wire, moving it into the lock, while she strained to hear any other sounds coming from the other side of the door. Come on! Come on! She quietly urged herself, taking the wire out once before slipping it back through the hole and twisting gently, feeling it move. With a faint click, the lock gave way. Tiling back her panic, she took a deep breath, clutched her scissors in one hand, and pushed the door open. As the door creaked open, Abby's heart hammered in her chest, her senses on high alert. She knew she was wading into perilous terrain, but the urgency of the situation spurred her ahead. The chamber beyond was barely lit, the air thick with the fragrance of stale cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. Abby took a cautious step forward, her eyes probing the shadows for any indication of activity. Suddenly, a voice reverberated from the darkness, sending a shudder down Abby's spine. Who's there? It was questioned, harsh and frightening. Abby froze, her breath seizing in her throat. She realized she had to move quickly to avoid anybody in the room reacting. She gripped the scissors tightly with quivering hands, dread and resolve rushing through her head. Gathering her bravery, Abby moved further into space as her eyes became accustomed to the low lighting. Then she caught sight of him, a bent figure in the corner with his features hidden by the darkness. Joan? With her heart thumping loudly, Abby murmured in a whisper. The figure tensed up and turned slowly to look at her, his eyes glimmering in the faint light. With a suspicious tone, he snarled, "What do you want?" Abby took a deep breath and momentarily wavered in her determination. But then she realized her true purpose for being there: to learn the truth about Joan's unexpected release from jail. She straightened her shoulders and met his stare, mustering her bravery. Fear was pumping through her veins, but she responded, "I need answers," with a forceful voice, "and I won't leave until I get them." There was nobody in the hallway, and almost black, with just a flickering light from the far end creeping up the stairs. "I don't believe we're alone," like she had done 100 times before while she was skulking about this ancient mansion. Abby licked her lips. She moved to the lower stairs and slithered through the shadows, her skin feeling too tight for her body and her lungs gasping for oxygen. She made her way to the second story and entered her bedroom, just dimly aware that the music had returned. Although it was empty, she saw that Isabella's bed still had a pile of clothing on it as she swept the room with the beam of her flashlight. Boots and folded clothing next to her unopened luggage. Her own made up with the sheets crumpled and tossed back as she'd left them. However, her sibling was not present. Her lips were dreadful. I could hear the same Christmas song drifting in from home. Everything is serene and bright. She stammered as she moved down the corridor toward Joan's room, The bedroom, which was the tiniest, was considerably dirtier than normal. Oh my God, the clothing and games scattered all over the floor, the unmade bed, and the garbage on his desk. An unblinking eye that reflected the light from her flashlight. She let go of the flashlight and suppressed a cry. She realized she was staring at the stuffed head of a deer that had been put on the wall and was now lying on the floor with its antlers propped up, and she shrank away to the door. Oh no! It felt as though her heart would burst from her chest. Only the deer has been there since deceased. She had always been frightened by the stupid dead animals that were mounted about the home. Grabbing the flashlight, she illuminated the remaining debris with its beam. She saw an eagle sprawled with feathers all over it, pushed up against a half-drunk bottle of Gatorade not far from the stag's head. It dawned on her that the bird had not only fallen from its position on the wall, but had been cut and decapitated. The head was apart from the body, its glassy eyes condemning, and its pointed beak stabbing into the carpet. The body, with its coiled talons, was still connected to the stand. When she moved the flashlight's beam to the wall above Joan's closet, where a sword had been mounted, her insides began to turn to water. The armament was a legacy from a very distant conflict. It was never intended for the weapon to be handled or removed from its wall-mounted position. Never. It is gone now. That did not surprise Abbey. He had been swinging and lunging with the sword, like he was in a fantasy fight, when Abbey had spied on him earlier this afternoon as she walked by his room with the door ajar. A ninja, maybe. Foolish, she had thought at the moment. She felt so terrified now. Her fingers clenched around the scissors handle. The adjacent room belonged to both of her elder brothers, Donner. He was Isabella's brother. They were both Mama's children. They belonged to Mama before she wed Daddy. Joan and Sam Jr. were brothers as well, the boys of Daddy. Their real mother was not the same. Abbey was left as the only child of both her parents. Not that it was important, not to her anyway, and most definitely not right now. All she wanted was to locate even one of them. The older boy's room was still the same, a jumble of crumpled sheets and coverlets that slid to the floor and entangled with clothing, boots, shoes, cans, and candy bar wrappers. Sam Jr. had his new Nokia phone on the dresser and his backpack pressed up against the foot of his bed. He never went without his new phone and was always the more organized of the two. How come he had left it? She swept the room with her flashlight's last fading beam, and her throat constricted. Donner's territory was in ruins. With a little pizza box long empty, a pack of cigarettes only half covered beneath his pillow. Nerves strained to the breaking point, she crept into the corridor again and heard the music once again. Glories stream from heaven afar. Coming from the CD player downstairs, heart in her throat, Abbey inched to the servants' stairs again, avoiding the wide carved staircase that curled up from the vast entrance and living space. Instead, she slipped noiselessly down the back stairs to the kitchen, where no lights burned. The sole light came from outdoors, where the moon glowed reflected on the snow. Quietly, she moved past the freestanding island, then beneath an archway to the dining room, where a large table ran from the butler's pantry to the French doors, going outdoors. Through the pan windows, she observed a heavy layer of snow on the veranda, beyond which the lake glimmered, partly covered by scarce stands of snow-crusted firs and pines. Inside, the table had been laid for the following day. Crystal glasses glinting crimson with light from the last members of the fire Daddy had started in the fireplace earlier. She'd seen him stack wood that he'd taken from the built-in cabinet near the fireplace and ignite old newspaper and kindling until flames sparked and crackled. The scent of smoke was heavier here, and something else. Something weird, pleasantly metallic. In front of the wide window, the Christmas tree stood at an angle, white lights twinkling, limbs shattered, not like it had been. Abbey felt the back of her neck quiver. Then her eyes fell on the wall. The shadow areas trickled down. They collected stains on the ground and the walls. She screamed, feeling like her gut was about to explode. She stepped into the living room and let out another scream. Her brother Donner was lying on Mama's white carpet, his eyes unblinkingly looking skyward, his complexion as pale as milk, his blonde hair stained crimson. As she took a step back, her heel collided with something soft, and she turned to see Sam Jr., coiled up with blood-stained hair, his eyes wide open and empty, and his mouth gaping. "No!" Her stomach cramped as she let out another scream, gasping and crying. She let go of the scissors and flashlight, and turned to see Joan, half concealed behind the Christmas tree, her clothes and face splattered with blood, and her hank of black hair cascading over her features. "Keep your eyes open." She was screaming and hyperventilating as she looked at him and saw him blink. Was he still alive? However, how? His voice was a distorted whisper as he murmured. All she could do was look at his face, splattered in blood. Help him to obtain aid. He stumbled back while attempting to pull himself up. His voice sounded watery as he muttered, "Go, run." His eyes rolled up inside his head as she retreated, sliding on the blood that seemed to be all over the place on the floor, on the walls, and even splashed up onto the ceiling. "Isabella!" she exclaimed. How in the devil had she got lost? "Isabella!" She stammered out of the room, choking out her sister's name, and pushed her way down the small corridor to her parents' bedroom. Abby burst into uncontrollable sobs as she forced open the door and saw the horror within. "No!" she said, utterly distraught. "No, no, no!" Her father was just wearing boxer shorts, and her mother was dressed in silk pajamas while they were in bed together. The blood spattered the wall and bedstead, soiled the blankets, and covered both of her parents. With blood streaming from his open lips, Daddy's face had a frightening blue hue, while Mama's blonde hair was disheveled, eyes focused. Massive, hideous cuts bared his skin across his nude body, and his chest's curly hair was matted with blood. She backed out of the room in a stupor. Deceased. Every one of them had passed away. Except Joan. Then she remembered the phone and headed back toward her brother in the living room. She needed to contact assistance for me. She retreated, stumbling to her feet, realizing she couldn't enter Mama's bedroom once again or see her parents in that way. Upstairs was Sam Jr.'s new mobile phone, and there was a phone in the kitchen. She would dial 111, call for an ambulance. However, she saw Joan had fallen once again as she hurried past the living room. Most likely, it was too late. She made the first move toward him. The main door opened. "Isabella?" "Not at all." "Mom, siblings?" A male. A large guy stood in the doorway. "The murderer!" She was aware of it. "I see." With a quick cry, she turned around, her bare heels slipping in a gooey puddle of blood. "Oh my God! What is this?" said the guy. He had witnessed her. She ran off at a full sprint. She rushed into the dining room as quickly as her feet would allow, crashing into a chair as she went, then darted through the butler's pantry and into the kitchen. "Hi!" The man's voice was deep, imposing. "Hey, it's you! Give up!" She ripped open the door, ran across the porch, and sprang down the steps into the backyard, dusted with snow. "Cease, young lady." Not at all. She continued to go through the drifts at a quicker pace thanks to his loud speech. His enormous form was visible to her out of the corner of her eye on the porch. "Cease." "Hello, young lady." Without pausing to consider her options, she slipped under the fir tree's lowest branches and followed the back trail which went to the lake. This snow felt like ice between her toes. It was compacted as if someone else had walked on it. As branches smacked at her face and berry vines grabbed at her pajamas, she continued to speed without paying attention. She felt a thorn puncture and heard her sleeve shred, but she continued walking without stopping and dared not turn to look behind her. She didn't slow down even though her lungs were beginning to burn, and her breath was leaving her in a hazy mist. With her pulse racing, she kept her head down and skimmed through a copse of trees, feeling the snow pattern on her shoulder. What had taken place? And who had slain Daddy and Mama? Why? As she hurried through the thickets, she felt the tears begin to harden on her cheeks. She also had terrible visions of her family, sliced and covered in blood, that flashed through her head and appeared behind the blurry trees. Her parents lie on their own, motionless. Donner and Sam Jr. lay next to one another, eyes glassy and hair tangled with blood. Joan tells her as she gets up, "Seek assistance." And Isabella, ghost white, encouraged her to press on as she peered out from behind a pine with long needles. She shouted over the pounding in Abby's ears, "Run, Abby!" She knew it was all in her head, every ghost. Tears clouded her vision, but she forced her near-frozen feet to propel her through the snow. She heard him approaching her, footsteps heavy on the path, a breaking branch cracking as he went by. Even though Abby was gasping for air, she could see the lake's glitter. The frozen surface beckoned across the woodland, glistening in the moonlight. A few buildings' lights gleamed like beacons on the far coast. Should she be able to make it? Yes, she could. She would. Quick, hurry up! Hurry up! With a yell of pain, she banged her toe on an exposed root and sprang forward. Her foot throbbed with pain, causing her to stagger a few feet and become momentarily disoriented. She felt like giving up and throwing herself into the snow, sobbing. Not at all. Proceed to run. Seek assistance. Joan is still with us. She plunged onward. The murderer was close in. She heard his frantic breathing, Iceland, and this footfall shaking the earth. But he, too, was straining, and when he yelled out, he was gasping. "For the love of God, girl, stop! I'm not going. I won't harm you." She didn't believe him for one moment. As she descended toward the lake, she reached the shore, and her feet fell out from beneath her. "Cease!" the man yelled. "Stop! Jesus Christ!" She threw her body forward, sliding off the beach and onto the glassy surface. His voice was raw as he yelled, "Hey!" Once more. She disregarded him and eventually managed to stand up, but she struggled to gain momentum and ran into difficulties. She ought to have sprinted around the beach. However, it was already too late. On the ice lay the murderer, not at all, willing herself over the frozen expanse toward the flashing lights, where she would find someone to aid her, someone in one of those cottages. She hurled herself forward. Her feet skidded madly. She was forced to avoid. Oh my God! He trailed after, sliding onto the ice. She rushed forward violently, more scared than before, only to fall on her chin. "Cease!" He was slogging over the icy landscape, approaching. She had to beat him to it, needed to leave. She saw him in the corner of her eye as she cast one last peek over her shoulder. He was too near, just a short distance away. Abby took a swing at him, and she worked even harder. She felt a shifting and saw, to her horror, the ice fissures under her feet. First a single jagged line, then shattering like a gigantic spiderweb underneath her. He froze. The web fractured. "Oh, God," he said. "Cease." In the back of her mind, she thought about the fact that she could hardly swim. She didn't move. However, it was already too late. She heard another deafening crack that sounded almost like a groan. Then the ice broke under her feet in an instant. Abby let out a cry as she collapsed, falling into the freezing depths that engulfed her core. She fell into the cold lake's depths and disappeared into the shadows. She attempted to swim through the ice pieces and air bubbles to the surface, where she saw the moon through the layer of ice above, flailing madly and battling terror. The water from the lake engulfed her and filled her throat. If she could just make it to the top, even that would be a miracle. More of the thin ice broke, the surrounding water swirled, and she was flung about as the guy plunged through, his massive body so near to hers, generating waves that drove her away from the icy, dark area and away from the air she so badly needed. No! 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 His bulky clothing and boots felt like dead weight on him as he struggled to acquire air, while she attempted to kick her way back to the surface clear of ice. But he saw her and made contact. She escaped his clutches as he reached out to grab her, struggling to swim and thrashing about in a panic as she looked anxiously for the surface and the moon that was high in the night sky. Rather, she encountered obscurity. She was surrounded by water, She has fire in her lungs. Abby Bear, go swimming. In her mind, she heard Isabella's voice. However, it was useless. Her lungs burned and hurt as the little air she had left burst into a surge of enormous bubbles. She was twirling about in this disorienting dark realm of the water. When she coughed, water instead of breath was lost. She was unable to locate the opening in the ice and was unsure of which way was up. Abby, keep going, you can do it! The voice of Isabella, far off and feeble. When Abby let go, her lungs were on the verge of exploding. She twisted lazily around, panicking a little, and in the growing darkness, she was only dimly aware of arms encircling her. The environment became strangely still and pitch black, and then, as if from a distant location, she heard the calm, steady tones of the music once again. Dream beautifully in heaven. A hazel hue that made her want to cry. She yelled, "Stop it!" before putting her iPhone in the holder, taking it off of silent mode, and applying the accelerator. She forced the gear change into drive, and the Jeep slid rearward. She looked at the screen as her smartphone beeped. The name of Aunt Fiza appeared on the screen. "Nope," she mumbled. "Not right now. Perhaps never." When she reached 28 in 2 weeks, she would finally be able to collect her inheritance, so she wasn't going to put up with the lady who had so kindly offered to raise her just to take advantage of it. She also didn't want to listen to Fiza's vexing inquiries or tiresome accusations. It had come to an end in Abby's life at the moment. She would have been troubled that Auntie F.A.I. continued to live on the family property, a mansion in the West Hills with a view of Portland. After all, Abby was supposed to inherit it. She didn't care, however. The magnificent mansion, complete with 7 bedrooms, a grand staircase, and stunning vistas, served as a somber reminder of the life she had been cheated out of. Abby had spent the most formative time with Merritt Margaret Rove and his second wife Helen, but their lack of attention had been evident. Aunt Fiza, who had been designated as her guardian, had taken over the home with her and her partner, a musician. The cottage nestled into the tiny lanes of Selwood. Their modest home on the east side of the river had seemed more like a home than a large mansion surrounded by wooded hills. Pressing the pedal, she accelerated into the traffic and inside-swiped a hefty truck. She received a furious horn blast and a shaky first shake from the red-capped driver for her efforts, but she ignored it and continued to drive. Once again, the phone rang. Aunt Fiza refused to give up. At the last moment, she turned the corner and retraced a little to turn into the packed liquor store parking lot. Thoughtfully, Abby responded, "Bad idea," but she also turned off the engine, got out, locked the vehicle, and pocketed her keys before entering. The area was well known, and the deal was simple: a fifth of vodka and 2 bottles of wine for good measure. Ultimately, the holidays were drawing near. Her sibling was also being let out of the mansion. It was time to rejoice, and Abby certainly needed some holiday spirit. That certainly is a lot of Christmas happiness. The 50-something lady working at the register had a strong cigarette that lined, and a flirtatious cap with a jingling bell over her orange-tinged hair concealed half of it. Cheers to a happy Christmas. Abby paid with cash, ignoring the cashier's perplexed expression as she bagged the bottles and returned the change. Oh no. The lady was attempting to locate her. Abby cherished her privacy. It was going to be broken, she knew. Something on a neighboring rack seemed to be a newspaper, to confirm her assumptions. "Killing in Cold, Massachusetts is to be released," screened by the headline. Additionally, in tiny letters, "Free Joan Jonas." Abby felt awful, her throat filled with bile. When the lady in her 60s, dressed in a long red coat and matching hat, placed her wine bottles on the counter, Abby reached into the pile of papers and took the top copy, saying, "I'll take this too." She struck the counter with a 5. The customer remarked, "Wait a second," in a pretentious, snobbish voice, her lips changing to a taut scowl that matched the color of her coat. "I came next." "You did. However, I arrived here first. Cheers to a Merry Christmas." Abbey instructed the cashier to put the change in there and gestured to a container for contributions to a nearby dog shelter, while the lady looked on in disbelief at her impudence. The client said, "Well, I never have. I'm positive you didn't." With the lady in the beret staring after her, Abbey slipped the newspaper under her arm. "Not very wise, Abbey. Recall that you desire to disappear into the darkness. Stay unidentified." "Yes, exactly." She raced outdoors, where night had arrived. Darkness was creeping in. Streetlights were blazing, and snow was starting to fall again, bottles clinking in the bag. After checking the rear, she placed the bag on the passenger seat and parked the car. As she climbed behind the wheel of a white Mercedes, the lady wearing the beret gave her a strange look. Again, a bit slower, Abbey blended with the traffic that was leaving the downtown area. "Get off now." Even though it was only 4 in the afternoon, headlights and brake lights were necessary since, at this time of year, the Nightfall app approached softly. With its splayed headlines and photo of the family vacationing in a mountain home spread over the front page of the Register, the newspaper curled the passenger seat, taunting her. Well, if you could call a 3-story home designed by a well-known architect a century ago a cabin, her folks did. Grand and elaborate, built to a precise blueprint by her great-great-grandfather, the cabin stained, rusting, and decaying. She presumed the sign was still up, but no one was interested in the sprawling old house where a whole family had been killed. She found both the Jonas Massacre and the Cold Lake Massacre to be equally terrifying titles given to the event. Abbey's mobile rang again as she was slowing for a red light, and this time she only saw a local number. Not a name. No caller ID exists. Ignore it. Reporters had been phoning Joan non-stop since it was announced that she would soon be free, but she would not speak with them. Wesley Colace was annoyed even by that. No. Specifically mention Wesley Cole. He was very intelligent, too endearing, too attractive, and too near the narrative. Abbey had been rescued from drowning by her father, an off-duty police officer, and in the process, he had perished. She was feeling more than a little guilty again. She most likely owed his child some time so she could explain the situation to him. However, it was not a wise move. Cole was the first reporter, regardless of how emotionally invested in the topic. And Abbey was very much in her man-hating phase at the moment. Due to Brad Dunes, who had been ejected from her life just 2 weeks before. Similar to her last few partners, Brad had shown more interest in her due to her public image than in Abbey as a person. Of course, there was also her inheritance, that is, the fraction that remained after Auntie Efes had the opportunity to spend it. Very unexpected. Turning on the radio, she wanted to shake off any last traces of guilt over Brad, and heard Christmas music, of course. Even worse, the vehicle was filled with the music of Silent Night, thoughtful and pliable. No, sorry, think not. When you needed rockin' around the Christmas tree, God, where was it? After turning off the radio, she spent the next hour driving in peace until she came across the Welcome to Woodstock sign, indicating that the town had a population of little over 12,000 people. Abbey avoided the main part of town, meandering around alleyways and side streets until she eventually turned into the quiet lane leading to her house. Just the way she liked it, she didn't know too many of her neighbors. She turned into her drive 3 doors down, right below the top of a short slope. Fortunately, the snow-covered roadway was free of reporters or press vehicles. But hold on, that would occur. Joan Jonas II was a free man. She pressed the garage door button on the remote with a touch of her finger, and before it fully opened, she was intrigued. She pressed the button once more, securely shutting the garage. In less than a minute, she entered the home, adjusted the temperature, and was welcomed by her rescue dog, Rhapsody. Rhapsody was most likely a mix of a Labrador Retriever and a Pit Bull, but that was just a rough estimate. Abbey would never know until she took the dog's canine DNA. Furthermore, she had no intention of spending money on discovering Rhapsody's confusing ancestry. Who gave a damn? All Abbey knew was that she had been adored like no one else since she was a youngster, by this 50-pound shaggy dog with intelligent gold eyes. She stroked Rhapsody's ears and grinned as she spun in fervent little circles until she was hardly more than a caramel-colored blur. "Yeah, you're a good girl," she remarked. "All right, I understand," she responded. "You get your treat," and took out a red wine bottle from the bag. "And mine is mine. Take a seat." Rhapsody sat there, staring at Abbey, until someone threw her a biscuit with bacon flavoring. When Abbey opened a top drawer and discovered a corkscrew, she proceeded to work while the dog sprang to catch the treat on the fly and trotted to the living room to crush it on her bed. When Rhapsody came back to stand by the door, Abbey was filling a stemmed glass with wine. After finishing her Merlot, she opened the door and went outside to see Rhapsody flying over the patio and frightening a winter bird that was perched on a branch, her best friend, which made the dog her only friend. She is to blame. She had never trusted a single person she had met throughout the years. An excessive number of individuals had only wanted to be around her due to their curiosity about her background, desire for anything from her, or a combination of these reasons. Friends were simply not worth the hassle. Dogs were so much better, particularly Rhapsody with her unwavering love. And partners in crime? Oh no. Ignore it. Another layer of downy snow was falling, adding to the 4 inches that had already collected. The flakes were small and powdery, and they vowed not to let up. Rhapsody released his pent-up energy and blazed a fresh path through the white mantle as she rushed from one end of the yard to the other. The dog had plenty of space to run on the long, narrow, snow-covered lawn, which was encircled by a fence. Sufficient seclusion to prevent both Abbey and her neighbors from spying on her. It was excellent. Now that the foliage was covered in snow, Abbey was reminded of the horrifying night she rushed through the woods, the night of the disaster that had altered her course in life. "Stop it!" Her voice was so loud that Rhapsody, who had her nose buried in the snow at the house's corner, abruptly glanced up, ears pricked, eyes ready to focus on any visitor. Abbey apologized to the dog and urged it to continue. "This is where you wrap things up. It's quite cold." As the dog ran about in the snow, kicking up white clouds and shaking the chilly powder from her nose, she took another big swig of wine and felt herself starting to thaw from the inside out. "I wish I was more carefree." A jet engine's distant sound caught Abbey's melancholy thoughts. She raised her head and attempted to see through the heavy clouds. A jet carrying passengers was flying high above, skimming the night sky to unidentified places. Snowflakes caught on her eyelashes when she blinked. What she would give up to take off, to disregard. She had tried it before, however, a previous trip to Europe. Her mind kept returning to Cold Lake despite all the excursions, exhibitions, castles, art galleries, and crowds of people. The Louvre, Notre Dame, the Eiffel Tower, the castles on the Rhine, the cottage on Lake Como, the room above a pub in Belfast, Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, and the castles on the Rhine were all now blurs, and the anguish and guilt lingered. Even after moving to Portland with Aunt Fiza, attending a junior college in California, transferring to Denver, and eventually earning her degree from Louisiana University in Rouge, she was unable to get rid of the memories. New beginnings, new locales, and new friends, without success. She was also somewhat ironic that the one job she was able to get bananas to reline, and the house where the whole ordeal had taken place. Her life had completely circled, providing her with the ideal setting to face the past and confront her demons, as she had been counseled for years, but at what cost? She remained an absolute mess. Most likely, it will be forever. And the home where she had been raised? The Portland property she had inherited, or would in less than 2 weeks inherit, now inhabited by Aunt Fiza, who moved there about a month after the disaster. Abbey wanted stability, a home she knew, and a place that would anchor her, she had said before the court. She even went so far as to live with Merritt Margrove and his second wife rather than remain in that enormous mansion overlooking the city. An area that appeared to retain ghosts of the past, but the ancient house up in the West Hills was anything but her home. Abbey had never felt at home at the hillside house with its breathtaking views, even if the horrific slaughter had taken place 60 miles away. Not after what had transpired. Her eyes burned and her throat constricted at the distant recollections of a carefree childhood that had been shattered one Christmas Eve by a madman in the mountains. She said out loud, "Oh, get over your bad self," and realized she had finished her glass. It's time for another, and to put a stop to this sympathy fest. Who, after all, claimed such recollections were so joyful? Hers were clouded, riddled with holes, and all those bits of nostalgia were just that. Bits and pieces, maybe even dreams, patched together, but still ragged. Right now, she didn't want to think about it. "Come on, Rap," she called to the dog. She walked inside, and Rhapsody trotted after her, shaking snow and water from her furry coat. "Yeah, go ahead. Clean floors are overrated anyway." After locking the door, Abbey peeled out of her coat and scarf, hanging them by the back door, then unzipped her boots and kicked them to a spot next to her umbrella stand. "Dinner?" she asked, and fed the dog before refilling her glass. As she headed upstairs to her bedroom, she glanced at her watch. Barely after 6. "Good enough," she said, and from jeans and a sweater, into her favorite baggy PJs. She caught sight of herself in the mirror, looking pale and wan, the flannel pajamas at least a size too large, her teeth discolored from the red wine. "Pathetic," she said in her reflection. Where most 27-year-olds would just be gearing up for the night, she was shutting herself in. She'd tried the party scene and frequented clubs, Anders her age, but since college, she hadn't had a lot of interest in going out. Probably one of the reasons she and Brad hadn't made it work. One of many. She returned to the main level, topped off her glass, and, in the living room, glanced at the bookcase flanking the fireplace and saw the one photograph she had of the two of them. Standing together, hoisting up champagne glasses in front of palm trees, while the Florida sun set behind them. A large crack had split the glass, evidence of their last fight, but Abbey thought it was appropriate to display the picture, fissure and all, even if it did remind her of the splitting ice on Cold Lake all those years ago. Don't go there. She closed her mind to that train of thought. And to Brad. He was, as they say, history. She switched on the gas fire, sat on the couch, and pressed the cushion next to her so Rhapsody would join her. The dog hopped up. Remotely, she turned on the TV, a flat replacement. From habit, he surfed, past the shopping network, cooking channels, home improvement, and the like. And the news where the Cold Lake Massacre was front and center, relevant once more due to Joan Jonas's reversed conviction and imminent release. "Awesome," she and I muttered, as a reporter recounted well-known facts, while pictures of her family and the mountain home they'd shared filled the flat screen. Just awesome. The reporter recounted the story of that bloody night. The facts summed up were: 4 people were killed, Samuel Jonas and his wife, Zelda Jonas, and 2 of their children, Samuel Jonas Jr. and Donna Robinson. Also, dead at the scene, Detective Jackson Cole, a cop who had been vacationing for the holidays at a nearby home and who was credited for saving the life of Abbey Jonas, the youngest daughter of Samuel and Zelda. And still missing? Isabella Robinson, daughter of Zelda Jonas and Zelda's first husband, Walter Robinson. Isabella hadn't been seen since late that night. The elder Samuel Jonas's second son, Joan, who had miraculously survived the attack himself but had been severely injured, had been tried and convicted for heinous crimes. Now, due to new information, Joan Jonas's conviction has been overturned. He was being released after spending nearly 2 decades, over half his life, behind bars. Joan, the reporter noted, had always sworn to his innocence. The police were reopening the very cold case. Any information from the public would be appreciated. "This is just in," the anchor said, glancing down at his desk, then looking up sharply. "We have breaking news. We've just got a report that Joan Jonas was released this afternoon. Our reporter at the prison is standing by." "Marilyn?" "What?" Abbey whispered, staring at the screen, and sure enough, A female reporter, bundled in a red ski jacket with the station's logo slashed across one shoulder, was squinting against the falling snow. Behind her loomed the stark walls of Bahnhof prison. Abbey stared at the screen, at the huge concrete structure that housed some of the worst criminals, historical guard towers, and razor wire atop the cement walls. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her ears. Joan was out? Already? And no one had told her? Abby's mind raced as she tried to process the shocking revelation. How could Joan be out of Bahnhof prison already? And why hadn't anyone informed her? A flurry of questions swirled in her mind, each one more urgent than the last. Feeling a knot form in her stomach, Abbey glanced around the room, searching for some sign of understanding or explanation. But all she found was the hushed murmurs of her colleagues, their eyes glued to the television screen, mirroring her own belief. As the reporter continued to speak, detailing Joan's release and the circumstances surrounding it, Abby's thoughts turned inward. She couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that washed over her, the sense that something crucial had been kept from her. Almaida's hand landed on her shoulder, startling her out of her reverie. She turned to see her boss, Mr. Johnson, his expression grave. "Abby, I need you to pull yourself together," he said softly, his voice tinged with concern. "This is big news, and we need to be on top of it." Abbey nodded, forcing herself to focus on the turmoil raging inside her. She knew Mr. Johnson was right. They couldn't afford to let this story slip through their fingers. But even as she tried to push aside her personal feelings, Abbey couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease that lingered at the back of her mind. Joan's sudden release had thrown her world into disarray, leaving her reeling and unsure of what to do next. As she turned her attention back to the screen, Abbey resolved to uncover the truth behind Joan's release, no matter the cost. Anderson continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in a cold, unforgiving silence outside. She knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she was determined to see it through to the end, whatever the consequences may be. A red chyron with the words, "Joan Jonas, convicted in the Cold Lake Massacre, has just been released from prison."